Good afternoon, folks. I hope you enjoyed lunch. Welcome back to this third and final session. In this session, we're going to be looking at how digital innovation is actually driving what I refer to as real-world benefits. I'm never terribly certain what we mean by unreal-world benefits, but I've got a vague idea what they actually mean. Our first speaker is Sarah Middlemas, who's COO for Ecometrica. And Sarah wants to talk about how data and IT are driving genuine environmental improvement. So, Sarah, over to you.
Thanks very much. Great, thanks, Mark, and thanks very much for having me. It's nice to be out the house, to be honest, and really nice in particular to be speaking about this topic. It's something that, if it's geeky to say, excites me a little bit for a number of reasons, to be honest. I suppose, first of all, it's very, I guess, a privilege to be in a sector that's really kind of at the intersection of two really innovative spaces, so sustainability and tech. Also, and I can't believe I'm really admitting this at a tech conference, I still have to sort of pinch myself that I've ended up in this sector. I don't think it's what I would have imagined when I left university. And because we use satellite data, we're technically in the space sector, which still elicits quite weird looks at family reunions. But I think the sustainability part of what I do is perhaps less surprising. I remember when I was at university, I remember first year, my first ever lecture, School of Management, University of St Andrews, and the lecturer came out and, he was obviously telling us what we could expect from the year, how it would work. But he also said something that really, really stuck with me. He said, and there were maybe 150, 200 of us in the room, over 60% of you are going to end up in a job in the green economy. I thought, wow, that's quite a lot, isn't it? And he was probably right. I've not done a full extensive trawl of my LinkedIn, but I think he rightly predicted that not only is there this sort of emerging sector of new companies whose kind of sole function is to help kind of drive this sustainability agenda, but there's also increasing kind of new roles and new departments in existing sectors, be it manufacturing, professional services, food and drink, finance. There are whole new roles and departments. So I suppose my conclusion is that I think I graduated at the right time. So before I kind of get into exactly some of the use cases and examples of how kind of data and digital is driving this change, I thought it might be useful to set the scene a little bit and to understand the wider context of how sustainability is moving from just a nice to have to actually perhaps business critical. So in 2020, the Financial Times reported that 95 of Fortune 500 companies have a chief sustainability officer. I've read that that's over 220% increase on 2011, and I suspect that number has increased now that we're in 2022. And there are also over 600 sustainability standards that companies can report on. Real combination of mandatory frameworks or voluntary disclosure like CDP, sort of long-standing certification schemes like Fair Trade, Rainforest Alliance, and new kind of emerging frameworks like TCFD, looking at climate risk, or TNFD, what are your nature-based financial risks? So really, it seems that sustainability is kind of embedding itself as a core function of business and how it operates. And there's some real parallels with other kind of core functions of business as well. So finance is one. I think the key parallel there is around reporting. So in 2013 or 14, the UK introduced mandatory carbon reporting. So that meant that every company that's listed or of a certain size has to report on its carbon emissions in the same way that it has to file its accounts every year. And this has been long-standing in the UK and Europe, and the US is about to introduce similar mandatory carbon reporting, as is Canada. And you see, out of all those reporting standards, the newly created ISSB, the International Sustainability Standards Board, is actually part of the Financial Reporting Standards Board. So it's really kind of trying to align itself there. And just as you have a kind of group of financial professionals, whether they're chartered accountants or financial literate people who have a kind of function in the business, I think we're seeing this kind of new role and a level of professionals in sustainability as well. And I think that's going to be an increasing trend as we go forward. And of course, it would be remiss of me not to draw some parallels with the digital and tech sector. In the past 10 or so years, digital transformation, I think, has fairly dominated business discourse in sort of, how businesses have to really embed tech and digital to improve their efficiencies, make sure they're not left behind, to really kind of future-proof their operations. And I think the same can be said of sustainability. I attended COP26 in Glasgow last year, and I think it's one of the most well-attended COPs by business leaders. There is a real presence of global business there, and everyone was talking about the idea of the next industrial revolution being the green revolution. So it's almost like, I'm not saying the digital transition is done, but this is what's next. And similarly, it's going to have to help improve efficiencies. I don't think anyone would dispute the fact that as your energy goes down, so do the bills, but so does your carbon. But also, it's another way to kind of future-proof your operations, whether it's in terms of not being left behind in the competition with your sustainability credentials, or actually looking at real tangible climate or environmental risks that you could be facing if you don't kind of force a change. So, as well as that kind of parallel, I think what's becoming increasingly clear is that digital will be a real enabler of this change as well. The pandemic obviously really kind of accelerated a lot of the digital transition that businesses had to do. And I think that acceleration will have a similar effect on this kind of green transition as well. Again, the obvious example is business travel. We all transitioned to doing business on Zoom. And my goodness, I'm glad that we're out and about, and again, particularly today, I'm glad this isn't on a screen. But the way that people kind of just choose to do travel has changed. And I think that the amount of travel we've done is definitely reduced. And that's been enabled by the fact that people can communicate digitally. And I think there are going to be many other kind of examples as we go through. So what are we at Ecometrica actually doing to kind of support this digital transition? So first of all is our GHG accounting software. It's cloud-based, and it enables our customers to collect data from across their operations, so various different types of corporate information. And our powerful cloud-based calculations engine allows them to report on their scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions, essentially pumping out an audit-ready report. The best kind of analogy I can say, it's like your financial accounting system, QuickBooks or similar, but specifically for GHG emissions. And just like financial software reporting, it can also allow you to kind of compare year on year, to measure against different KPIs and set targets for the future. So you can then measure how you're improving year on year and actually start to implement changes in what you're doing. Another way we're doing, and this is kind of the slightly more sexy stuff, using space data. I think our previous marketing manager had the tagline, monitoring the health of the Earth from space. And I'm not sure I can really improve on that, if I'm honest. But basically, yeah, that's what we're doing. We're using satellite data, Earth observation data, to generate maps that help monitor land-based assets. So a big part of what we do is working with global agricultural commodities companies. So in the UK and the EU, it will soon be illegal for anyone to import commodities such as palm oil, soy, cocoa, if they have links to illegal deforestation in their origin country. So it's going to be increasingly important that companies actually have a handle on whether, where they're sourcing from and what's actually happening or has happened in the past. So that's what we can provide these companies, a sort of due diligence service. For example, we have a company that sources cocoa from Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire, and they're sourcing from maybe 150,000 different farms, all smallholder farms. So it's quite challenging from a supply chain anyway. So what we can do is bring in appropriate data looking at land use and land cover, so what's actually on the ground, how has that changed over time, and are there any kind of particular risks or risk of deforestation. We can then overlay exactly where those farm areas are and rapidly analyze whether or not there's a risk of non-compliance. So out of that 150,000 farm supply chain, they can rapidly see if there are 100 or 500 that are potentially at risk and channel those resources to understand where they ought to intervene. And once they've done that, they can also then incorporate satellite data to monitor over time to ensure there are no other infringements. So, satellite data enables us to kind of update these maps on an annual basis, quarterly, monthly, or even more frequently. There's some systems that can enable near real-time monitoring of deforestation and other land use changes. So it's a real kind of shift to operational monitoring. But it's not just kind of globally and in the tropics, and it's also not just risks. I think increasingly people are seeing opportunities. So instead of trying to reduce deforestation or reduce their impact, looking to investing in nature-based solutions to try and sequester some of the carbon that they're emitting. And this is evident particularly in Scotland. So there's definitely growing interest in investing in protecting natural capital, like peatland, but also in restoring forest and woodland. So earlier this year, we launched the Scottish Earth Observation Service, or CEOS, which is essentially a suite of tools that leverages data from satellites, data from drones, and really any kind of geospatial data to help landowners, land managers, and investors make more informed decisions about how to manage their land appropriately. So things like actually measuring their natural capital, understanding what habitats are already there, looking at where is the best place to actually channel those conservation efforts, identifying areas that are most appropriate for new woodland and new forest creation, and also actually monitoring carbon in forests. There are increasing number of people who are investing in land purely for the carbon, and they might not be living near that forest. So actually being able to measure it remotely and ensure that forest is there and it's growing as you're expecting it to can be really, really important. And finally, it's not just all about kind of looking back and looking at what's happening. We can always also use this data to see what could happen in the future. Looking ahead at sort of climate risk is becoming of increasing interest and importance to companies, whether it's from a reporting standpoint, like TCFD, which is the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosure, or just looking at kind of tangible risks. So what we do is we take historic climatic data, so that can be data on temperature, on rainfall, on fire incidents, drought, land cover change, and then our data analysts use this to model what might happen given different climate scenarios as defined by the IPCC. So in the next 10, 20, 50 years, companies are able to look ahead and identify what is the likelihood of heat waves in a certain area, of drought or of flooding. So as I say, really important from your kind of disclosure perspective is becoming kind of an increasing requirement for companies, but also just managing actual risk. Looking at if you've got an agricultural supply chain, is that supply chain secure? Or if you're a developer, if I build this house here, will it be underwater in 10 years? So I'm going to leave it there, but I suppose my key takeaways are really just ensure that parallel between what the green transition needs to be and what the digital transition is. It's going to be easier for some than others, and definitely requires cultural and change and change in operations, but has the potential to have a really significant impact and is really important to kind of future-proof these businesses. And obviously that technology is going to be a key driver for this change in terms of helping business measure, report, and comply with different reporting requirements in order to actually monitor the impact and progress of interventions, as well as managing existing risks and future opportunities. Thanks very much.
Our next speaker is Neil Burnett, Chief Technical Officer for ARIA. This made me smile when he said that. I said, what are you going to be talking about? And he said, human-computer communication. In my case, it tends to be quite obscene, but I'm sure that's not what he has in mind. Neil, over to you. Thank you.
Cheers. What's the cheapest thing? So if I spill my water, it's not a big disaster. And if I'd realised I was behind a podium, I would have written more detailed notes, but I was busy watching the Rangers get beat last night. So. Hey, hi, I'm Neil. That's me. I'm the Chief Technology Officer for a local company called Aria NLG. In Aberdeen, we employ 60 people, roughly 60 people in Aberdeen, and globally we employ around about 100 now. 300 now. Should have written better notes. Here in Aberdeen is our Technology Development Centre, where we do our R&D, innovation, as well as product development. It's our home, it's where we began. The work we do is spawned out of the University of Aberdeen and years of research that a couple of professors within the group did. They conducted many experiments and a lot of research where they could find that humans could make better, more well-informed decisions when using language or text or narrative instead of just graphs alone. Should clarify that our name is Aria NLG, not Energy, which would be much more common in these parts. But we are an AI company, artificial intelligence company. NLG stands for Natural Language Generation, which is the field of technology we work within. I just want to talk today a little bit about that natural language part and why I think language is a key part of future human-computer communication. It might take the form of swear words. Probably, it's one of those things, like 90% of all human-to-computer interaction in language is actually swear words, but I haven't run those numbers. So I say it's the future of human-computer interaction, and it might sound a little bit funny to say it's the future of human-computer interaction because people are already interacting with computers and technology through language at the moment. I mean, most people have devices in their pocket that if I said, Siri, go look up the Rangers score last night, it would probably cause something to happen, right? Steady. But the technology for language is out there and it's in use now, but it's not really entered business. It's not really entered the working domain in such a way that it could and it should and it might. Done correctly, and if humans, us people, will support it, then I think language can and will change the way we work and behave and what it means for people to go to work in a fairly dramatic way. So if you think about the history of human-computer interaction, back in the old days, okay, there was probably punch cards, but then you get commands through DOS, and then Windows took over, and you have the opportunity to have multiple things on your desktop suddenly and interact with them in a very visual way. And that's a big revolution, right? Like people being able to interact with their computers in such a way. And then, almost without us noticing it, touch became the de facto standard. Well, not necessarily within business, but touch has become a new way of interacting with computers that really took off. In the beginning, didn't it feel a little bit silly to be on your phone all the time and like touching a device to make it do things? I mean, maybe for some it did. And did you feel like people were reading over your shoulder? Did it feel that it was a little bit unnatural, right? Was it the little small screen was a bit difficult to work with when you were trying to do emails while you're on the move? But it very quickly became very regular, right? It enabled you to be able to work on the move. It enabled you to be able to handle emails at the weekend and at nighttime. And, you know, it's moved forward the way we interact with technology. It's moved forward the way we work. And I think language will do the same. So language itself, when I talk about language, I mean like English, French, German, Spanish. I mean human languages that people talk. And if you think about it, language has evolved over many years, especially in these parts, whereby people have found that as the best way to communicate with people and to get your point across, right? And it's a fairly fundamental thing to say, but it's true. I mean, we don't interact with each other by waving, well, we do sometimes wave our arms, right? And we do sometimes grunt at each other, but language is the way to convey a complex point and to interact with people and get your point across and influence people. If we didn't have language, what life would be like? It would be strange, right? We'd all be animals. So through the use of language, it's helped humans communicate better, and as technology and artificial intelligence get better, language needs to be at the center of that as well. So where is language technology now? What's the current state? as I say, most people have got Siri or Google or Alexa inside their houses and even in their pockets. In the house, it's very useful, right? I mean, there's a good app out there that you can use within the house. But on your phone, on the move, it's not really there yet, right? I mean, do you not feel a little bit silly talking to it in public? Who asks Siri to read their emails or to Google the latest news of the football scores? I'll stop that point, right? But you know, you feel a little bit silly doing it, right? It's not really entered proper life in business form yet, right? You might talk to a robot if a robot rolled up to you. You know, you might interact with that from language because it's got a human face, but you probably wouldn't interact with your boring black box quite so clearly. So what do we do, ARIA? We work in the field of natural language generation, as I said. We are in a particular area of natural language generation, but the overall field of natural language generation and NLP, natural language processing, is such at the moment. There's a lot of buzz around about the use of language models and machine learning-based techniques. You may have heard of things like GPT-3, which is billion parameter language model. You may have heard of Meta, they're now called, who've launched their own language model and some services with that, and how people have been using those for really interesting solutions. But what you find with this type of technology is that you can't necessarily rely on it to give you correct answers. I was playing with GPT-3 myself and finding that you would ask it to take a long narrative summarizing sales of products in regions to markets, etc. And in its summary, it would make stuff up. It would invent the fact that a certain product sold in New Zealand when it's not, for instance. So there's a lot of hallucination going on there. But as a technology, it's fascinating, it's interesting, and it's moving forward and very rapidly going towards a place where language can be generated from computers to interact with humans in a very good way. The more traditional academic approach, rather than trusting machine learning to do all this, is to refine rules and models that allow you to ensure that you get high degrees of quality from the analysis the computer is doing, and very succinct and factual statements that come back out. The future, I think, of language technology is a hybrid of both, whereby we can use the speed of language models and the scale that they can find and summarize and create language, but curated by rules and logic that are put in by humans. And the humans are putting those things into the system and encoding their logic using technology like ours, available for $5.99. You know, but it's the people who are doing that are effectively putting the boring, tedious things that they do in terms of work, putting the knowledge that can be done by a computer into a computer system, so that when they retire, the company doesn't lose them. But even more pertinently, when the human can then focus on the more interesting tasks and trust the computer to be advising and be commenting and reporting in the way that they would themselves in other facets, right? The things we do reporting and we do conversational AI. When I talk about reporting, we're generating reports in the field of finance, in the field of pharma, in the field of insurance that companies need for compliance, or we're generating reports that tell people things that they don't already know. And in doing that, we tell them it using language because, as those studies that were conducted by the professors and doctors at our university had done many years ago, they found that that's the way to get the point across, to explain and prove people that the decision that's being made or the recommendation that's being made is born out of all this evidence. It's making points and justifying that these things have taken place, and saying that you can make a decision that you can carry on with confidence off the back of this. And through language, you can be persuasive. You can be a little bit more vague about things where you need them to be vague, and convince people that they need to take a leap from there to make their own choices on what they do. We also work in the field of conversational AI, and when I say conversational AI, it's kind of like chatbots on steroids. So we're actually working, you know, we as I say, we're in pharmaceutical, we're in finance, we're in insurance, but we're also in pizza, which is a subject close to my heart. So what we're doing is we're building an experience, a chatbot on steroids, that allow people to order pizzas and food and everything in a better way than they currently do over the phone instead of online. You'd be amazed that 30% of people in the US still order their pizzas over the phone instead of using online. It's a surprise for me, but they still do that because they want that human touch. They want to be able to interact with people and ask questions and probe deeper. And what's the gluten content of the medium? And what's the fat content of the large? They call up because they want that interaction, but the stores, and especially in America where there's a massive labor shortage at the moment, they don't want those phone calls. They want people concentrating on making food, so they want the calls out. Rather than diverting those calls and creating a really bad experience for their customers who are going to decide to go elsewhere, they want a much more intelligent system that's conversational, that's more fluid, that does not just allow them to say, press 1 for a large, press 2 for cheese. It's a much more advanced sort of system than that, where language and the ability to articulate and converse is at the heart of that good experience that keeps people coming to those companies and keeps them on the phone. So, just to kind of summarize then, why is language really, why am I making that claim that language rather than anything else should be the next form of human-computer interaction? Well, because we can start thinking about how we interact with our computers and technology in general in a way that supports us do our jobs better, do our jobs faster. So that instead of just seeing graphs and then having to ascertain what, is that graph zoomed into the right level, rather than running database queries, rather than digging into data in a deep way, if we can trust the system to run all those analytics, but tell us and justify to us why it's made the decisions that it's made, then we can begin to trust it. And if we can trust technology to tell us through complex reasoning and clear explanation, then we can start to change the things we do at work. We can stop doing the things that are boring. We can stop doing the things that are menial and tedious and repetitive. We can spend more time going to conferences and eating nice food, conversing as humans, talking to each other, solving real problems, investigating, innovating, doing research and development. So there's a lot of buzz about technology and AI taking people's jobs, but I don't think the risk is about taking people's jobs. I think with AI, if AI evolves in the right way and becomes much more communicative, then what it'll do is it'll allow people to not do the boring things. It'll allow people to be augmented. And think if all those boring tasks went away from everything you do, what that could elevate you in your positions to do. Think what that could have you doing as human beings. You could be much more creative. You could enjoy work. You could have a better life-work balance, and everything would be better. We use the tagline superheroes, superhumans. We use the tagline in some of our promotional material. And we infringe a little bit on some of Disney's copyright there, but that's the point, right? Isn't AI being able to communicate and convince and being a helper to us the thing that will help us, even as humanity, evolve further? Thanks.
Our third speaker is Caroline Lawrenson, Managing Director of TL Tech. And Caroline wants to talk about their experience of developing their own voice technology. So, Caroline, over to you.
I feel like there's maybe a collaboration with me and Neil. It will all become clear. So, I guess for me, I want to talk a little bit about our experiences. And I'm going to start off with a question for you. So, what is a brand? Is it this? So this is my logo for our company. So brands help identify companies, different products or services. You as an individual, you could class yourself as a brand. But actually, there's no one thing that makes a brand, and ultimately, it's the way your customer perceives you, and you can't really control that. So brands are important, and if you're a business, you'll know how big an asset that is for you and how much care and attention to detail you put into choosing things like your logos. But people, they do confuse brands just with a logo or a slogan or a tagline. We've shared some pretty cool taglines today, haven't we? Or any kind of visible, recognizable mark. And so these are all like visual things. So my advice, or the things I'm going to talk about today, are about how you can differentiate your business by thinking about how does your brand sound. And in the online world, that's becoming increasingly important. So this is how our brand sounds. Ooh. So that is what is known as sonic branding, and is a very powerful way to connect with your customers at a much deeper level, and in the voice world is the key way to differentiate yourself. So our story, so we started TL Tech, Thomas and I, my husband, in 2016. We saw ourselves as the plumbers of the smart home world, but what we quickly realized is that the people that can benefit from these technologies the most are actually the least likely to be able to access them. And we love transforming people's lives with tech. There's nothing that makes us happier. But then along came the COVID-19 pandemic, and we couldn't go to people's houses anymore. So we set about transforming our business model and helping people remotely in new and innovative ways. We created lots of free resources that would help people to learn how to use things in their home that we would normally go and do for them one-to-one in person. Lots of Facebook Live tutorials. So we did Tutorial Tuesdays with Thomas, and we focused on teaching people how to use the Amazon Alexa smart speakers. And the reason for that is that of all the tools in the smart home toolbox, they are by far the most powerful devices, and they offer great functionality at an affordable price point. So it was around that time that we realized, on this journey of discovery, learning more about the functionality, that in the same way as you get apps for mobile phones, you actually get apps for voice assistants. And when we looked in that space and the sorts of applications that were available, there's a lot in the entertainment space, there's a lot in like productivity, and like reminders and calendars and linking with your emails, that kind of thing. But there wasn't really anything in the well-being space. And we were thinking about our customers and about what they would be experiencing, so anxiety, loneliness, confusion about the situation they were in. And if we couldn't go to their house to support them with their tech, then we were really aware of that loneliness and how that might become a significant issue. So what did we do? We decided to create a daily conversation, something that would help them to feel supported in the home and help them to be more aware of their own well-being. And that became KindSpace. So KindSpace is our Alexa skill. Skill is just another name for an app. And we launched that actually before the end of the year. So pandemic 2020 set about helping our customers, and before the end of the year, we'd managed to launch what became KindSpace. KindSpace is now available internationally as well. And we've been on a huge journey to get to this point. So I'm going to tell you a little bit more about that now. And for me, what we've observed is like three main trends. So I'm going to talk to you about how voice changes the way we control things. It's changing the way that we search for information, and it's also really going to be influencing the way we purchase things in the future as well. And then I will sum up just with some things to think about if you are going to go on a journey of voice of your own, and how voice could benefit your business, and some links for you as well. So in terms of control, this is quite a staggering trend actually, but I think a lot of what we're seeing is being driven by the pandemic as well, and that voice, it makes things more accessible and easier to control remotely, so that kind of touchless control. So back only just 5 years ago, the number of devices that were Alexa compatible and that they could be controlled by voice was only 4,000, and we're now at over 100,000 devices. So there's very much a rapid expansion in the space there. And then on the search side, I think this is something we've really been thinking about in terms of how to design an experience that is easy for people to use. And for searching for information, what's quite interesting is some of the key differences between like a web search and a voice search. And it's natural in human behavior for us to want to speak in sentences and use more, we call them intents and slots when we're designing things, but putting more information in terms of what we're looking for in our questions, whereas in a web search, we might just put in keywords. And the other thing that we're quite aware of is how the search results are presented. So on a web search, you can present loads of results. I mean, most people won't scroll past the first page, will they? But you absolutely can't do that with voice information because you're overwhelming that person with too much. And what we're kind of observing is that perhaps there's some work to be done in improving that, and then also allaying any concerns that someone might have about, well, why was that result the top result that was shown to me? And there's not quite enough transparency yet when it comes to that. So is that the top result because of advertising? Is that genuinely the thing that is going to, is it the most accurate response for my needs? So a bit of work still to be done there. And then for us, what we've kind of seen personally is the kind of discoverability. So once you've created your user experience, the App Store equivalent, the Amazon website is not fantastic when it comes to discoverability for users. And there's also some issues around voice communication and it being misinterpreted. So when you're choosing your name, it's really important to think about what you're going to call your application to make it really easy for users. Another really important thing to highlight is if you start your business, one of the very first things you might do is choose your domain name. And then you'll go online and you'll purchase it and you'll know that you've secured that part of your brand and you've protected that part of your brand, and there isn't currently the same mechanism for voice. So it's very much first come, first served. So if you have a brand name and you want to use it in voice, then you want to maybe consider how you go about securing that at this stage. There's also some quite complex rules about what you can and can't call yourself. If your business has a very unusual name that isn't a word in the dictionary, then you might find it a little bit more difficult to secure that brand name. So a few things to think about there with search and making it discoverable, making it easy for consumers to find you. So my third trend is kind of building on the search stuff, is around how people buy things. So people aren't just searching for things, they're buying things. And I found this piece of research really fascinating. So this is from PwC, and you'll see there 42% of people have purchased something with their voice. And I'm astounded because as much as I love voice and I'm a massive advocate for it, I've never actually purchased anything directly through my smart speaker. But it's definitely a growing trend, and it's an interesting way for businesses to think about how else that they can generate revenue, so maybe more opportunities for you. I think when you look at radio and you look at audio mediums, then there's some really compelling research that shows it's far more memorable for consumers, and that actually, if your voice assistant makes a recommendation to you, you might be more likely to act on that recommendation, so they convert quite well in terms of sales. Again, that thing in the back of my mind is, is the consumer being misled through advertising that they don't realize is advertising? There's not quite enough transparency yet in the space. But certainly consumers, they warm to it more and they feel it's less intrusive than like a pop-up on a website or a social media advertisement. So whilst it's still early days, there are some really nice use cases in this kind of e-commerce space or voice commerce space. So if you have forgotten to order a present, you can order things. So Interflora have a really nice one that you can order flowers and get them sent directly to people. There's some really nice audio experiences. So one I'd recommend is called Endel, and it does really nice soundscapes, which is quite nice. And then, of course, there is our voice application, Kindspace, if you want to check that out. So a few of the unique characteristics of voice. So this is some of the things to maybe think about when you go on this journey. So it's very much, it needs to be something that isn't just an information exchange. So you're trying to design something that isn't just a kind of call and response, and you want it to be engaging, but you also want it to be simple and intuitive. So you're trying to design something without any visual cues, and you don't want someone to get lost in that conversation or confused because you've given them too much information. So you have to try and keep them on track, and if they get lost, you need clever ways of bringing them back on track. It needs to have personality, so back to that sonic branding, because it doesn't have any other cues, so that personality, you can only really bring that through by the audio. And in using audio, it's a brilliant way of bringing across empathy and build trust as well. And actually, when you look at a lot of the most popular use cases, a lot of them are entertainment-based. So if you can, think about how you're going to delight and entertain that end user. Gamification is a growing trend, across like mobile applications as well as voice applications. So is there a way that you can use that to encourage user retention? And then some of the things to really consider are around accessibility and any barriers for people. So that might be regional accents. So actually, Scottish accents, a lot of these voice assistants struggle with Scottish accents. They struggle with female accents as well because we have a higher pitch. If it's someone with a speech impediment, you might have to think about how you adapt that for them. And then even, people who are bilingual or multilingual, how is their user experience going to be affected by how you design things? And in terms of your use case, you might be thinking about what else might the user be doing at the same time as they are doing this? Are they going to be driving in the car? Are they going to be cooking in the kitchen? So maybe have a think about background noise or other distractions. So what are the benefits and why should you think about a voice strategy in your business? So the first one is it grows your customer base and gives you a whole new communication channel. It builds your customer relationships and it increases user satisfaction. It increases your brand recognition. As I said, it's more memorable. It improves the accessibility of your content, and by looking at this as an option, you're actively supporting digital inclusion and democratizing access to information. It reduces friction for the consumer and makes a lot of these interactions much more convenient and quicker for them. And it facilitates reduced contact. So from a safety point of view, that touchless operation can be really beneficial. As I said, there's opportunities for new revenue generation models. So you can even be looking not only at purchasing and the revenue generated through that, but affiliate revenue and advertising. And then even if you don't have something that's consumer-facing, you might want to consider it as an internal tool. So something that can improve your employee engagement, your cross-discipline communications, reporting, these sorts of things, any team communications. And they can really help to transform your productivity. So our experience, we've focused on the Amazon Alexa ecosystem. So I thought it'd be nice to leave you with some of our resources that we have utilized. It is a new and evolving space, which can make it difficult from a developer's point of view because they quite often change things and they update things, and then you as the developer have to kind of move with any changes that are made. The Alexa Skills Kit tutorials actually were just recently updated, so they had gone quite out of date, but they've recently been updated, so they're a good place to start. The Amazon team, they run quite regular Q&A sessions, which are really great. So if you've got any questions, you can pop into them and type in the chat and get answers. The YouTube channel keeps all the recordings, so you can go back through the historical information. We've used a lot of the resources from Dabble Lab, and also Code Academy has a really basic kind of beginners level course. And then in terms of the community is actually lovely. There's loads of helpful people on GitHub. There's also another really nice site called APL Ninja that does the visual side of Alexa, so the Alexa presentation language if you want to create content that has visuals. And if you are a Slack fan, then you can also pop on Slack and chat with the Alexa community there. And the only other thing I was going to say was I do have a blog on our website, so if anyone wants to recap on this information, then there's a blog there for you to check out. And I'm here for questions as well. Thank you.
There is going to be an opportunity for questions now, which is going to be guest chaired by Graham Gordon, as if by magic. Ta-da! And can I ask Fraser Brown to come up too? There you go. And Graham, I will leave you to it. No, on you go. Go on. Pearls before swine.
Good afternoon, everybody. Hope you're all well. Hope you've enjoyed today. Just before we come to Fraser and then, because the rest of the panel have introduced themselves and great presentations. Sarah, I know you're not from Aberdeen, but you're here now, so we've got you. It's as simple as that. But there are 4 companies doing some world leading stuff in terms of AI, digital voice, digital future stuff. 3 of them are based in Aberdeen, and not one of them is an oil company. So that should be complementary to the ecosystem that we've got here in Scotland. That's a massive driver for us in the room here when we go back to our desks, our offices, our homes, and think about the talent that is on the stage today already and the invaluable work that's being done and still to be done. But a huge part of that certainly happening in Aberdeen and definitely in Scotland that is complementary to all the skills, all the work that's been built up in this area since. So part of those projects with Opportunity Northeast and Digit and the digital and entrepreneurship space in School Hill is really complementary and supportive to what's going on here. And some of the stuff I've heard today, you know, I'm in this sector and I wasn't aware how advanced it was. So we should be we're punching above our weight on a global basis in a daily way with the talent that we've got on stage. So well done, all 4 of you. So Fraser, that should have got you to settle in there because we've heard from everybody else. You're not allowed to say, I'm Fraser, I do beer. You've got to give us a little bit more enlightenment, please. Fraser Brown from Brewdog.
Okay, well, good afternoon, everyone. I'll start with, my name's Fraser and I do gin. Is that better? No. So look after global head of IT for Brewdog, so making sure that we are producing beer, packaging it, getting it on the road, getting it into the supermarkets, getting it direct to customer, but also providing the capability for the guys in the bars to serve you the beer, the gin, the rum, the vodka, the whiskey, the cider, the soft drinks that you need and want as well. So yeah, looking after about 2,000 members of staff globally and dealing with all of that just up the road and up in Ellen. So yeah, having a lot of fun doing that.
And it's still HQ. Thanks, Fraser. It's really important we recognise that these organisations are headquartered here, so a lot of the key decision-making, development work still happens here in Scotland, which is really what these events are all about. Sarah, if I could maybe start with you. We've talked about digital transformation, probably in the last 2 years, physical transformation and how we work, social transformation, and green transformation. So there's a lot of transformation going on there. What about the adoption part of it? How do you feel your business has been more open-minded to tech innovation in the last 2 years because we've been driven in that direction because of everything out of our control?
Yeah, I think definitely we've seen an increase. I mean, as a software company, I suppose we've always been quite open to digital tech, and we're small enough that we can still be agile. But I think one of the things that we really noticed is that kind of remote collaboration became much more of the norm, which was really great to see. You know, we have an office, a much smaller office in Canada, but instead of being an office that oh God, I forgot to dial in Canada to that one. It became an everyday thing because everyone's remote, and it's not just Canada, it's with other people, other institutions in Scotland, in Europe, in the rest of the world. So that was really great as that kind of innovative space became remote. That was probably more how we saw how we were working changing.
Okay, thank you. And Neil, from your side of things, have you seen customers more open to, I mean, you're a pure tech company in real terms. Have you seen customers more open to the innovations and the creativity you can bring in to their non-technical disciplines and businesses?
It's, yeah, I guess so. I suppose our experience is when you work from home, you suddenly have more time, right? Like, I think when you have time to do your washing in the middle of the day, you have time to walk around the garden or go out for a walk during the day, and that's thinking time. And with that thinking, with the extra thinking time, okay, I sing in the car, I don't think in the car, but you know, with having space and being able to change your scene and things, not just being in the office every day, I think that means everybody's able to have different perspectives on things, and that leads them to research something a little bit different or look into something they might not have otherwise had time to do, or think a bit more about something somebody said in a talk or a conference or a blog or something. And that's why people are maybe a bit more attuned to what else is out there, you know?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, thank you. And Caroline, from that home perspective, do you think a lack of company has driven people maybe to sing in the car or at the office desk a little bit more than they've done before? Do you see that adoption of voice being accelerated because of lockdown, because of what we've experienced over the last 2 years?
Yeah, there's some really good research actually from Foxley Digital that they did back in 2020 after the kind of first main lockdown that shows the huge uptake in people actually actively using their devices and finding new use cases, I think was the big thing that their research showed. So, you know, a lot of people you speak to, they have smart speakers and the most that they'd ever done with them was play the radio. And then it was, you know, people finding, you know, that they could listen to the newspaper as well, or they could do their shopping, or, you know, they were finding new use cases and using them more regularly. And I think that has stuck a little bit.
Mm-hmm. We've got some questions coming in Slido, so we'll get to those just in a second. Fraser, from your side of things, from a production and a consumer environment, both quite noisy environments, how does a voice strategy sort of work into your thoughts of how this could work forward in your space or place?
Yeah, I guess it's an interesting one. I hadn't really thought about it in too much detail, but I'm guessing with the way that technologies go and improvements in wanting to make sure that guys can do things as quickly as possible, not necessarily grabbing for scanners to scan products as they're trying to get them onto a lorry to get out the door, then there's potential opportunities there to try and improve on things aside from whether or not it'll cope with a West Coast accent, perhaps. I don't know. Our warehouse is down off the M8, so yeah, that'd be an interesting one, especially this morning, if that would have worked.
Star Trek had it fixed years ago. They had this massive starship that the AI floated through the galaxy on, and it understood Scotty. So, I mean, the voice recognition's been around properly for Scots for a long time, so the West Coast shouldn't be a problem. Just very quickly, we'll go through some of these questions here, and thanks, panel. It's always the question we get asked when we do these sort of things about privacy. Any concerns about a speaker listening to you all the time? Let's start with you, Neil. How do you feel about that one?
Yeah, it's interesting. There's a couple of questions that are kind of linked, and especially in the workplace. So we were actually talking with a customer, Mars, whether I should say it or not, but we were with Mars at their factory. There are no Oompa Loompas, it's a big shame. But the interesting place, interesting workplace, right? Yeah. And this was pre-COVID, and in the meeting rooms, they refused to have Alexa in the meeting rooms because it was difficult to authenticate. So anybody could walk in and ask a question about how financials are doing, and if the smart speaker is able to respond to that, then it's potential problem for them as far as they're concerned, right? In the home, I mean, privacy concerns. The fact that it's waiting for a wake word is supposed to be the insurance you have, but it's always listening and always waiting for a wake word. And I'm sure we'll probably hear stories. I've seen stories about occasions where people can actually listen to more than they think they can. And I wonder if that's what kind of holds this back a little bit. Mm-hmm. So the idea that smart speakers is not for everybody. I think they need to find other ways of getting conversation into their lives, and that's on device, it's on computer, it's chatting with bots and Slack and Teams and things like that. So some people will go for it, some people won't, and the technology needs to support all those different perspectives.
I was going to say, I feel quite embarrassed sometimes that I'll be on a conference call and all of a sudden Alexa will just blurt out that she didn't understand what I was saying, and I'm thinking, is there a quality control that I don't know about here that I'm not getting my point across? But
absolutely, and I think perhaps, Caroline, we use hybrid a little bit too much, but there's a mix of technology. There's physical and there's virtual now. There's the digital space and the physical space, but the two are so blurred now. Do you think that genie's out the bottle now in terms of placement, recognition, data protection, awareness? You know, is there a bit more education we should be doing?
I guess there's a couple of things to pick up on. So the latest Alexa devices have voice profiles and also facial recognition. So we're all going to go crazy about it now, taking our face as well. But it's edge controlled, so it's controlled on the device. So it's the latest 15-inch device has that. And It's a little bit frustrating now because now my kids can't do stuff on it that they could do before. Like simple things like adding things to the shopping list, it's that strict now with how you set up the user profiles. So that technology is evolving in terms of, you know, only allowing certain people access to things. My daughter and I look really alike, so sometimes it gets a bit confused. So it still needs improvement, but they're working on it. And Amazon themselves, they take that privacy really seriously. We have some blogs on our website around how you can go in and change your settings. So the default settings out of the box for these Alexa devices, you know, it is that they're going to save your data for like 6 months or something. And you can change that. You can change it so that it doesn't save any of your data. And anytime that you say something, you can actually just say, Alexa, delete everything I said today, and it'll just get wiped off your records. But it's things like that that people don't know they have so much control, and they don't realize that the default settings are, unfortunately, that they will look at your data for research purposes.
Yeah, and I suppose it's like any piece of technology that's new, out-the-box settings are never secure. You know, security is very much a people thing rather than a technical thing, because you've got to change, and there are ways of doing that. You intervene in, and if you're overly concerned about security, you don't work in that space, I suppose, or use it. Sarah, can I ask you about the technology that you're using just now that is designed toward predictive a lot of the time as well as reporting, and the analytics that you're using around that? How real time is that becoming now with the institutions and investors and governments, I suppose, that you're working with, and how are you seeing it being picked up and used?
So I think what's been amazing to see in the past few years when we're looking at satellite data, there's been a bit of a revolution in small satellites. So they're cheaper to launch, you can launch more of them. So the opportunity for that real-time monitoring is actually very real. So if you were looking at kind of wanting to monitor forests, for example, you could probably over a certain area in the tropics get a reading every 5 days, every 6 days. So that's what we mean by kind of near real time. And they're certainly more expensive, and that's just free data. There are commercial operators like Planet and others out there who are able to task for you and actually probably give you daily readings if you like. I think one of the things that we're getting asked about a lot is that kind of alert. So, you know, from a commercial system, has there been a deforestation incident? But increasingly in sort of disaster response, I mean, that's been around for a while, right? So has something reached a certain threshold, whether that's a clearance, a fire, a heat, also looking at flooding. So, you know, has the soil saturated and hit a certain threshold? And that's obviously increasingly important for insurance and looking at kind of risk from that perspective. I think a lot more from the investor side of things, who we're talking to a lot more, they're still wanting regular updates, but it's still at that kind of maybe quarterly basis. But still, the fact that we've got enough data to be able to produce that kind of monitoring, it still feels a lot more operational than it was sort of 5, 6, 7 years ago.
And maybe in that theme, but another natural disaster, which is the storms that have, you know, millions of trees across the UK. We were chatting earlier about it, excuse me. Have you had to adapt your modelling at all to accommodate a disaster like that was unplanned? You know, how's your modelling being affected through that, and what have you seen from that?
Yeah, so I think in terms of kind of forest loss in Scotland, you're always going to have to tweak your algorithms to make sure that it's you know, fit for purpose and looking at the right species. So that's always an ongoing process, really. But that ability to kind of rapidly respond, I think, it threw quite a few data providers off, the idea of, okay, we don't have something set up, we need to just do it. But it's amazing how quickly various people were able to do it. And I think the real benefit was that, you know, traditionally kind of forest owners, land managers, they'd either have to just go and visit it, and increasingly they're using drones. But if you've got an investment house that actually has invested in a portfolio of properties all across Scotland or indeed the UK, then being able to just have that kind of snapshot to say, okay, this event happened, this is what it looked like before, and this is what it looks like now. These are the areas you actually need to go and visit. It just kind of provides that efficiency that they might not have otherwise.
Okay, thank you. Fraser, if I can maybe come to you, and I'll try and keep the question as short as I can. Pre-pandemic, technology had a strategy. Pandemic hit, strategy went out the door, and it was all about delivery. How has that affected your business now 2 years in and we're getting back to normal, how are you looking at technology within the business now compared to where you were 2 years ago?
Well, I think with BrewDog, it brought things into sharp focus. Certainly, there was a bit of a tendency with BrewDog to go, IT, it's a bit of, it's a bit of a cost center. What does it give us? Does it help us to produce beer? And so there was a bit of, I guess, an arrogance in that respect. With everyone needing to work from home, then it brought it into sharp focus that, technology was a massive enabler. Having that ability to work remotely, to interact remotely, it really brought home to the powers that be that there needed to be a bit more of an investment on it, especially from a cybersecurity point of view, making sure that we're keeping folks safe as they work from home. So in many ways, it's allowed for some greater investment and allowed for a clearer agenda from a technology point of view within BrewDog to actually invest properly. The guys are quite relaxed. I think it is born out of them starting up in a garage in 2007 with a dog. The company's grown that quickly that in some ways it's caught them by surprise in many respects. So for me, it's been actually helpful. Sounds a bit perverse. COVID's been quite helpful in terms of moving technology on within BrewDog, and I think that'll keep us on the front foot a bit more and continue the investment conversations at a sensible level rather than, wait a minute, this is going to cost us money. Does that help us produce beer? No. Well, yes, it does. But,
yeah. So that impact, that disaster that hit everybody globally at the same time has forced change in the business, and digital tech has benefited from that in your organisation.
Absolutely. I mean, I think, I've been with the business for, 18 months now. Timing's everything. I think my predecessors have probably been quite unlucky in that respect, that I've managed to take on a role during the middle of a global pandemic and everything's been kind of focused on IT. So, yeah, I mean, it's been transformational from that point of view and really brought it up to the conversation at a board level.
Yeah. You may have noticed that Fraser's also dressed in appropriate colours for today, so hats off to Fraser, well done. Caroline, talking about the integration of technology, new technology in terms of voice, one of the questions that's on the board tonight is, how do you see more websites introducing voice as a navigation tool, as well as the traditional type search?
So I guess today you can navigate websites by voice. I don't think many companies do it particularly well, even myself. That accessibility piece is mandatory for public companies, but it isn't, if you just have any kind of business today, you have to consciously choose to make it accessible. I guess from my point of view, when it comes to voice, and I think I mentioned it in the presentation, it's all about the simplicity of how the information is presented and not overwhelming people with too many options and too many choices. My classic thing that I describe to people is I got a new Fiat 500 electric car and it has an Alexa app, and I was all excited because I was like, oh, I love Alexa, let's try this new app. And the user navigation is horrendous. And I just want to ask her, what's the miles left in the battery? And for the life of me, every time I go through that user experience, I'm like, I've forgotten what it told me to say. Because the command is that long, and I'm like, who designed this? Because they've clearly spent money on it, and it's a really bad user experience when you just want a little bit of information. So yeah, it has way too many options and it's way too complicated. So I don't think it's as simple as taking your website and then turning it into voice. I think you have to take a voice-first approach, and you have to completely forget everything else that you've designed and just go right back to the basics of what is my user interested in finding out, and how do I structure that in a way that I can guide them on the conversation and they don't get lost.
And that maybe leads us into some of the problems you solve then, Neil. You've got a customer with a lot of data that is a website or a car, or it's producing data, and they think it's simple to translate that into voice commands or machine interaction, human interaction. But it's not that simple, because if Fiat haven't got it right and they're using a piece of technology that's been around for a while in Alexa, how much of that re-education of a customer, a business customer coming to you to try and solve that problem, how much of that is the dialogue with you?
Yeah, I wouldn't trust Fiat to get it right anyway, because they put two...
even their mobile phone app is rubbish.
Yeah, I have a Fiat, and it's got two windscreen washers, one for the lights, which is the big one, and one for the windscreen, which is the small one. It's just madness, right? But I think there was a lot in Caroline's presentation that kind of got to the challenges of what it is to create voice apps and voice tech, right? It's a completely different medium. You can't see multiple options. You can't get the power of three to communicate, to see things, right? The things that you read and see in your eyes and how you process that well, that whole space has been fairly well developed. There's a lot of people who refine that area, but it's still kind of evolving with language. It's still evolving with voice technology. And it's a different set of things. It's really interesting because it's kind of a relatively new field. Mm-hmm. It's really interesting to get into that you get the chance to make one point. You have to use words and phrases that are very clear. There's a unique set of challenges there that we'll all, as people, will evolve towards knowing how to do that. In the same way we know how to click around a website, that you know what a button looks like, we know what that's going to do. As more and more use of language technology takes place, we'll learn how to work with it better. And that's kind of the bit where the humans come to meet the technology a little bit, and there'll be a meeting in the middle.
Mm-hmm. And that part there about you usually know when you've clicked a button because you hear a click or you see something change. It's that affirmation that we get as humans that is either, it can be, you've got a teenage boy and you ask them to tidy the bedroom, it's usually silence or a grunt. But even something as small as that, you know that the message has been received and hopefully understood. Is that part of the cycle in terms of voice interaction, that there is a confirmation that comes back?
It can be, but you have to be very careful not to overdo it, because then it extends that conversation and it can get really annoying. So, if you answer with a number and she says, you said the number 1, and then they say yes, and you say, okay, let's go to the next question, you're just going to get annoyed as a user. Mm-hmm. But you do need some kind of confirmation sometimes, depending on the complexity. And it's a bit like when you swipe your bank card and it does a little beep, and you know that it's taken the transaction. Something simple like that can work.
That's an important part. That beep is there for a reason. It's not to tell you that the text worked, it's to tell you that the text worked, if that makes sense. It's not confirming the technology to the technology, it's the user that's confirming that.
Yeah, and I'll take my card back now.
Yeah. And I've never thought about elongating the conversation that way, the way you've been discussing today, that to build all that into normal conversation is normal for us, but in an interaction in that way, it's not normal. It's a difficult place to be.
Yeah. And when you design the conversation, you're filling slots and intents, and so you're telling the computer program what you're expecting to hear. And then if it doesn't hear what it's expected to hear, then you could do that course correction and you can bring them back into the conversation. But the other interesting thing is how younger and older people interact with these devices. And I think there was a comment on here about like the kind of misinterpretation of computer says no kind of thing. And if that happens to an older person, they're going to go, oh my God, I've got it wrong again, and they'll just give up and they won't try it again. Whereas you can actually design the conversation to be much more empathetic, and you can almost say, like, it's my fault. Like, you can say, I'm the computer, I got it wrong, and then re-prompt them in a way that encourages them to keep trying rather than giving up. So that's also important to think about.
And that fallibility there about technology is one of the points we've got here, and maybe Sarah, as possibly a user rather than a pure technologist, as these guys are, do you feel or think, or would you be comfortable in using voice technology for business critical or critical situations? What do you feel? What's the possibility of AI starts lying to you? I suppose is the leading question in that sort of space there.
Yeah, it's a good question. I suppose you've got to kind of define your own parameters as to what you're comfortable with. We work with data, so there are a lot of things where it feels like it wouldn't make sense. If I'm reading off, how many tons of carbon have been kind of sequestered by this tree, it's a lot to say and it's a lot to receive. But I can imagine there would be some, maybe more operational things. Again, maybe not as intense, but I'm perhaps a slightly different sector. We do a lot of international work, so there's a lot of travel involved with that. So, you know, are there circumstances where voice recognition would be helpful? You know, if someone is out in the field, they're doing a survey, and something happens, so we need to locate them. You know, apps like What 3 Words are becoming, you know, increasingly popular, and the idea that you can, it speaks to what you were saying earlier about the idea of language. It's a lot easier to say 3 words than it is to read out a coordinate. And okay, as I think we've heard, there are kind of opportunities for misinterpretation, but for some, it can be a lot easier in those situations to just say, you know, those 3 words than try and kind of get your phone in and figure out the location and get up Google Maps. So, you know, I think you've just got to define your own parameters for what you're comfortable in.
It's a great example of using the technology in a very precise way. What 3 words doesn't change, it's just 3 words, and it lends itself well to voice, which is probably part of the strategy. What do you feel about that, Neil? Where do you get to a point that you are completely confident with the tech when it's voice related that it's not lying to you, it's understood you, and it's not lying to you? And we're not talking Terminator days here, but we're in that sort of space, which is exciting. I think it's an exciting place to be.
Probably a little bit longer than it takes you to sort of believe and trust a person who joined your company as well, right? It's probably like, because you've always got that, like when you meet something new, you've always got that time it takes you to feel like you get it and you understand it and so on. The advantage of a computer system is you can see the rules. I mean, you can get in there and you can see the logic, but if the more baked into what you do, the more you'll interact with it, and the more you interact with it, the faster you'll get that trust.
Yeah.
That's, I guess that's the thing. It's just, it's with everybody, it takes time.
Yeah. Fraser?
I was just thinking about the application of it in terms of buying beer. You know, if we go down the route of online, you click on a button, you say that you're 18, how clever is it that it's going to pick up that it's a mature voice that I'm hearing, or, you know, there's my son who's only 13 sounds as though he's 21, but would it be nuanced enough to pick that up? I guess probably will. You guys live and breathe it more than I do. So just thinking that through in my head, how that might change things as well.
Well, after a few brew dogs, does it recognise that I can't have any more because
you're
it
slurring
doesn't
your
really
words.
recognise
Yeah, exactly.
we're not recognising any form of Queen's English at that point from everybody. But that virtual assistant, that virtual engagement, it's coming. Yeah. You know, we're all accepting it's coming. I suppose it's down to the acceptable usability is what we're saying is, and it isn't a user case in terms of how we move forward from here. One question we've got here as well, will voice be the death of regionalised accents? I think the BBC tried that in the 60s, I have to say, and then it's all come good off the back of it. You know, as youth respond to the needs of technology, so I have to say I don't have a problem with any voice control system that I use when I go to use it. It's, you know, and I think at times a reasonably thick accent, but do you think it's sanitising how we're speaking? Do you think that's part of the social media generation, that everybody wants to sound and look and be the same? And I know I'm being stereotypical as the old manny on the panel, but do you think it's having an effect on how people enunciate and speak?
I don't know. That's a really interesting question, isn't it? I mean, the reason I'm really interested in the accent side of things is we're going to be starting a new project soon, and it'll be an app that's Scotland-wide, and it's taking text data and translating it into an Alexa experience. And I know she's going to struggle with a lot of the words in the database that we will be taking information from. So we'll have to do a lot of manual corrections. So you can put in code that changes the pronunciation and corrects that, but it's going to be a bit of work. So I'm concerned from that point of view. And then also for the users on the other side, when they're asking for stuff, is she going to recognize what they're saying? So that's going to be quite a challenging project. But for me, actually, I'm quite excited at some of the new use cases that we might be able to create. So my husband, Thomas, is from Shetland. He has 2 voices, like I kid you not, right? So he has his home voice, and when he talks on the phone to his family, I'm just like, oh, okay. And then he calls it his soothmoother voice. So I'm a soothmoother because I live on the mainland and grew up on the mainland. And he has 2 voices, and he can switch between them just like that. But I love the idea that voice can be something that captures our heritage, and we could create experiences that, you know, bring that together. There's an amazing girl on TikTok actually that's been doing some really good videos in Scots language, and she's quite young, and you know, the young people, they do embrace this. They want to hold on to their heritage because it makes them unique.
I mean, I agree with the problem, right? I think it is. I think it would be terrible if we lost the Doric, for instance. But language has always evolved, and it's always moved on. I mean, there's very few people speak Gaelic anymore. Nobody speaks Latin anymore, right? Language evolves. It's the same in my house, right? Is that my grandparents speak the Doric. My parents speak Doric with the grandparents, but less with me. I can speak the Doric if I'm talking to Ian about football. But my kids don't have it at all, right? Like, they, if anything, their accent's slightly American. I think it's going to happen. I think there'll be a change of language. I don't think it'll be one monotone, same way of talking, but there'll be nuances in the way people talk and communicate with each other, and different groups of friends will be nuanced and different. So it's sad that the regional accents might die, not just because of voice tech, because of watching videos on YouTube and the globalization of media, but it also creates new and interesting different variations as well.
Sarah, do you see some of that with the international team? I mean, Canadian and Scots, but you probably have quite a diverse team, I would imagine, just in the sector you're in. Do you see that as being a challenge, or do you think that's normalised? It just finds a way of normalising it itself?
Yeah, I think it definitely does. I mean, it's funny, a lot of our Montreal team, they, you know, some of them came over to the Edinburgh office for the first time, and, you know, one chap, he didn't speak any English, but he spoke French, and they said, oh, but he was up for it. And, you know, it's amazing how people do just adapt and find a way of working and just kind of ease into it. Like as you say, it does sort of normalise.
Okay, thank you. We were talking about challenges, and the challenge that COVID gave everybody, and technology has helped meet a lot of those challenges. Possibly one of the challenges, speaking to a lot of friends and people in the room over the last few hours, is the skills challenge where everybody seems to be entering into, for lots of reasons, and we won't go into the politics of it, but it's a real fact now. And Neil, you mentioned earlier about how you can take some of that drudgery work away from any form of work, so the specialists have got much more freer time to focus on the specialism. Do you think voice and AI and machine learning and what we're talking about today serves a part in that skills challenge moving forward? Maybe start with you, Fraser, and work our way along the panel.
Yeah, it's actually quite a pertinent question from what we're looking at in terms of our help desk capability. So a lot of the help desk functionality, they talk about AI, whether it's true AI or not, but from our point of view, as I've kind of alluded to, sometimes IT has been a bit of a problem in terms of getting the budget or the headcount, and certainly from a skills point of view, it's been a challenge for us within BrewDog. So we absolutely see an opportunity in trying to lean on the AI to actually deal with those repetitive tasks, that ability to actually take a bit of a load off the guys on the front line to allow them to do more things, but also provide a user experience whereby they're managing things themselves and fixing things themselves potentially. So yeah, we're massively keen on doing that, and we're just going through that process with our help desk at the moment. So it'll be interesting to see how it pans out, because everyone talks about AI and how it's transformational, and you know, is it sales speak, or is it actually going to be something which will help us? Hopefully it is. And I can see that only improving us as an organisation and helping our skills set to allow folks to develop in other things where they've got a bit more time to do that.
Absolutely. Caroline, is it a little bit of sales speak, or do we think that voice, AI, machine learning is going to help us with the skills challenges we're moving forward with?
Well, I firmly believe that there are use cases for voice that we haven't even thought of yet, and that capability and growing that capability in our country is going to be really important. And not just from an academic point of view, but you know, the kind of practical use cases kind of on the ground. And you know, skills for us is finding the right talent is difficult because our business is quite diverse, because we've got the kind of smart home hardware side of things, and then we have the kind of voice, more software side of things. But we have started doing some collaborations. So we did a really nice project with Fraserburgh College. We created a smart home interactive teaching board. So it's got all the smart home stuff on it and it's power specs on the back, and the students can get their hands on programming the automations, they can see how it works. And when we were up there a couple of weeks ago, it was really interesting because some of the conversations were actually around, oh, we're going to use this not just with the electricians, we've actually identified that we can use it with people that are more interested maybe in like health and social care, so that they can start to see some of the use cases. And I was like, that's fantastic, because that's exactly what we need is for people to have more understanding of what the tech is, and then they can come up with the use cases of, wouldn't it be great if it could do this, and wouldn't it be great if it could do that? And that's kind of what we've done with our customers from day one. We don't go in and say, here's the solution. We say, you know, what's the one thing that you want to be able to do in your home, or you know, what are the things that you're struggling with? And then we work with them to come up with solutions together. So I think tech, it'd be nice to see more creativity and more user-centered design and more involvement for everyone.
I think one of the things you cited there is, I can't remember, it was Aberdeen City Council looking at a project of putting an Alexa or something similar in a lot of care homes or locations where people weren't getting a regular visit. So they would get a care call at 10 a.m. or whatever every day, and it would be conversational rather than a video call, a difficult piece of text. It would be a conversational, hey Graham, how you doing today? And just to get that emotional side of things, because voice is very emotional. You know, I prefer radio and podcast than I do to TV, because it's certainly for me, it stimulates your thought process, and depending where you stop the conversation, you've got to fill in the next bit. So the conversational part of that, I think, is hugely beneficial in terms of the health side of things. Neil, I mean, how do you feel about that next steps?
Well, the problem of computing and technology filling the skills gap is the one that's going to make our shareholders rich, I hope. It's kind of like central to what we do as an organization, is trying to keep knowledge in a business, trying to fill those gaps. I mentioned the pizza ordering system. It's not even a skills gap. It's a lack of ability to get people to do those things that we're trying to replace there. The other story is we built a system. We were working with an organization in the Gulf of Mexico and New Orleans, and they had this guy, and his name was Dave, and he knew everything about the oil rigs offshore. Right? I know very little about oil rigs offshore, sorry, but he knew all the nuances of the equipment, he knew the nuances of the process, and every time an alarm would go off on one of the rigs, they'd have to shut down production, and Dave would spring into action with the biggest screen you've ever seen worth of graphs. And he knew the subtleties, and you're like, you put a part 1X524 on that one, and that always wears out. It's been about 6 months since you changed it. It's not like, change the part and away you go. Or that's that one, that's forever having problems, carry on, bring everything back up again. He just had that knowledge, but he'd always been so busy, he never managed to impart that to anybody. So there was a group of people who were sort of junior to him who did roughly the same job, maybe had part of his knowledge, but he had it all, right? And he was, 2-3 years away from retirement when we were talking to him. Dangerous life, carried a gun in his car, New Orleans. And we're building a system, and he called it Dave in a Box, because then he felt like once this thing got up to speed, he could retire, and then everybody else who was working around could just solve the problems Dave couldn't, or could start working with the new tech as that stuff came in. And that's kind of what I was saying, right, is that you can start focusing on new and interesting problems when you can rely on the fact that the existing ones are just handled. And if we can automate all those things, and automation's been a thing forever, right? That's what technology exists to do. If we can automate those skills and we can automate that knowledge, then what it does to everybody else from there.
Who needs an Alexa where you can have a Dave in the Box, is what I'm saying. I'm going to come back along the panel in a second because we're into the last 5 minutes. If you want to ask any last questions, please do so now. And I would like you to think about a giveaway, a takeaway for the room today and what we've discussed so far, which would be great. But before we do that, Sarah, just what's been discussed there, you talk about oil and gas engineering, that wealth of expertise, but nothing's much older than a forest, so, and you've got people who are farming, tending that land, and they've got real world experience about being boots on the hillside. are you capturing, or do you see an opportunity to capture that voice, that story, as somebody, that farmer or whoever it is, walking up the hillside talking about the landscape, and feeding that back into your geophysical information as well?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think the more information gathered about that kind of stuff, the better. You know, people are really interested not just in where is the forest, but how high is it? What's the species? Is it healthy? Is it not? And so much of that you can, at the moment, only get from going to the field and then feeding that into machine learning and AI algorithms. And it's really important. You know, we work with a lot of different partners who are working on very specific applications, and they've all got foresters in their teams, because they know they need to kind of gather that information in order to really kind of make those specific applications, so they can start to kind of automate those data processing chains and scale it. It's one of those things, obviously the more you iterate it, the better it gets. So the more it's able not just to kind of look at what's happening with more accuracy, but predict what could happen later on as well.
Mm-hmm. So we've got a Dave in a box, a forester in a box, which is fantastic. We do office in a box, but that's a different thing completely. So thank you all for your questions this afternoon. Thank you, panel. And I'd just like to work our way along from yourself, Fraser, back along on one thing you would like, or one thought. If it's a golden nugget and it's worth investing in, you know, that would be fantastic. But if it's not, that's okay.
Well, you know, there was lots of stuff that's gone on today. It's been great to see the sort of collaboration and the breakout sessions. There's certain things that resonated with me in terms of, I think it was flying the plane while building the plane. Mm-hmm. I think that really resonated with me. But I mean, I think, you know, the NLG stuff, real food for thought in terms of what you can do with voice in technology and where that leads us, probably where we're going to go with things. Bit of a cop-out that I say that on the last one. Yeah. We're up here talking about it, but
good enough, absolutely. Yeah. Caroline, thank you.
I have a gift for everyone. So my Kickstart trainee that's been working with us for the last 6 months, we gave her a special project. We didn't want to launch her straight into working on the Kindspace code because it's quite complex, and we wanted her to get a really good understanding of how to design a voice experience from scratch. So she's created a Pomodoro timer on the Alexa. It's called Focus Space. So if you're working from home and you need some help concentrating, all you need to say is, Alexa, open Focus Space, and then you'll be able to choose your timer, whether it's 25 minutes and 5-minute breaks, or 50-minute sessions with your 10-minute breaks. And we'd love to know what you think. She's worked really hard on it, and we're really proud of her, and we're really excited that we're able to keep her on in the team as well.
Great sales pitch, thank you. Neil?
So it's interesting in two different presentations from either side of me and mine as well. But so you can see on one side there's a phenomenal amount of analytics and everything's and where that's going and the technologies that are used to do these type of analytics, and that's an area in which technology is moving forward. And then also another area where technology is moving forward is in order to be able to allow people to interact with it in new ways, and that's creating new challenges. And it's just interesting to see these ways in which technology is evolving and helping people. Mm-hmm. And obviously I would come back to where language would be central to that. But I think it's good for people to think, you know, I'm not always going to be prodding at my computer with my mouse. And the type of insights we can get and the ways we can interact with those insights, it's where technology is going. Yeah.
Fantastic, thank you. Sarah, final words from you.
So
no pressure.
No.
You can just say ditto.
Well, I mean, ditto. But no, in all seriousness, though, I think without kind of going through the sales pitch, what's been incredible in terms of listening to these presentations is, again, just the idea, no one in this room needs to be converted that technology is important, it's a key enabler. And so I think I would just say, well, there's a huge kind of opportunity for tech for good. And I think everyone here, certainly on this panel, acknowledges that, and I suspect most in the room do. So I guess I would just encourage, let's keep thinking about that, you know, whether it's environmental, whether it's about inclusivity, do you know, how can we leverage this to make technology kind of do good for people and for planet?
Great way to finish off the panel. Thank you for Digit for putting the today together and the panel together. Thank you to the panel, Fraser, Caroline, Neil and Sarah. Please give a round of applause to show your appreciation. Well done, team. Thank you all for attending, and Mark, you're back up.
Yeah, thank you very much, Graham, for doing an excellent job. I mean, to be honest, it was just a bit too good a job. It was irritating. Yes, thank you to all our speakers today. We shouldn't be, I suppose, too surprised that technology that uses voice is difficult, because we've all figured that out for ourselves in terms of the last 2.5 years and Zoom calls and things like that. Phone calls are not as good as face-to-face. Zoom calls are not as face-to-face, although you can see the individual. Psychologists worked out years ago that when we communicate with somebody face-on-face, 55% of that is visual cues. So it's body language and things. 38% of it is tone, and 7%, just 7% is words. So the only people at the moment who will be able to use the technology as it currently exists, pre-empathy, if you will, are people who have real difficulty in reading human clues, because they've learned to do things very literally and very logically. So there's an interesting middle ground to explore there, how we actually bridge that gap. Do we head towards being more mechanistic ourselves, or do we train the machine to be more empathetic? Fascinating area for study. Thank you also to our conference partners, exhibitors and sponsors. If you're wearing a badge, Digit will recycle those badges. I've got a big basin of them at home. It's a complete waste of time. Just leave them at the registration desk or on the table here when you leave the venue. There's a drinks reception hosted next door in Conference Suite 2B. That is sponsored by BJSS. Please stay and join if you can. There is a conference survey. There's a conference survey, I'm afraid, but this one's quite short, and it isn't just a digital exercise. Digit actually do use it to try and refine and improve future events. So if you can find the time to do it, they'll be much obliged, you know. And all sessions will be available to watch on demand on Digit's YouTube channel. Our next 3 events are all live. Details can be found on how to book at www.digitfyi. And I'll just repeat for you, the upcoming events are Cloud First Summit on the 16th of June in Edinburgh at Dynamic Earth, FinTech Summit on the 15th of September, Edinburgh at Dynamic Earth, and the huge Digit Expo on the 10th of November at Edinburgh EICC. As I said, there is a drinks reception next door. I'm Mark Stevens. Thank you very much for your attention, and a safe journey home. Thank you.